This episode of the Unbelief Podcast is brought to you by The Collective at TheQuollective.com. The Collective is a group of writers and activists that are trying to resource people, defy the powers that seek to silence dissent and to resist fascism. It's a really cool place, and I've written a couple of articles there. You can actually get 1 month free using the offer code, the number 1 month free, when you sign up for The Collective at TheQuollective.com. That's TheQuollective.com. Welcome to the Unbelief Podcast, your journey, actually our journey together beyond inherited beliefs to a spirituality that works for you. I'm your host, Jeremy. I'm a deep skeptic, also a pastor. We can fix that later, right? No? All right, so you've made it to another book club episode of the Unbelief Podcast, and today we are diving into a parable that Jesus told. It's called The Rich Man and Lazarus is the common name for it. We see it in Luke chapter 16, verses 19 through 31. Now, normally I just talk to you about what a passage says, but since these are little vignettes, little stories, I've been reading them from beginning to end, and so that we can sort of get the story in our head, and then we'll go back through. So we're going to read this in the New Revised Standard Updated Edition, which is the edition that scholars say is the most accurate. So let's talk. It's Luke chapter 16, and we're going to look at verses 19 through 31. It says, there was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. He called out, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames." But Abraham said, "Child, remember that during your lifetime you received good things, and Lazarus in like manner received evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides all of this, between you and us is a great chasm that has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us." He said, "Then I beg you, Father, to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they will not also come into the place of torment." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them." He said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent." He said to him, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." So that's Luke chapter 16, verses 19 through 31. I was reading in the New Revised Standard Updated Edition. So this passage, now if you can just read it on the face of it, there's lots here, but this passage also has an enormous amount of cultural background that adds even deeper meaning to it. So it starts right there at the beginning, where it says, the rich man was dressed in purple and fine linen, who feasted sumptuously every day. In this time, there was this practice of the rich people to try to model themselves on the upper class in Rome. So they were ruled by Rome at the time, and the upper classes in Rome wore these fine fabrics and these very expensive colors to produce. And that's what we see here. And that's also a little bit of a hint, a clue to us that this person is a very wealthy person, very high status. And they are somebody who has completely adopted the customs of Rome. And yet, this is also a Jewish person, because later, he recognizes Abraham and all of that. So there's this assumption that, so it's clear that in that later interaction that he's Jewish. And at this time, that was one of these very frustrating things for the Jews, where when they saw somebody who was Jewish, who had basically adopted the life of a Roman instead of the life of a Jew, was this deep compromise. And yet they believed that people who were wealthy were being favored by God. And so a wealthy Jewish person was seen to be favored by God and to be, most likely they would say like, oh, well, I mean, it's weird. He's adopted these Roman customs, but he must be a really good Jew because he's so wealthy. He's very holy. He's like right with God. So that also gives us a hint into a couple of verses later. But the next verse says, "And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores." And the word sores here, it's the right English word for sure, but it's a word for sores that are weeping, right? That stuff is coming out of, and when sores are like that, there is people are not able to be employed in that culture. So he was poor, but he was poor with really no hopes of getting out of poverty because of his physical medical problem. And there were, if things progressed, if he got some other skin disorders, he might actually have to leave the town and live in a colony of people that were very sick. It's awful. And what I think is interesting here is what we see as the reaction of the rich man. Is to ignore him, right? But we're going to get there in just a second. So, next verse, this is related to the first verse's background. It says, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. Yeah. So what's happening there is might seem a little bit more desperate in one sense than it actually is. And it's more tragic also than it comes off at first read, at the surface read for people that live in the 21st century. Because in Rome... And we can assume this person has sort of adopted these Roman practices. In Rome, they would bring, and in other places as well, wealthy people would have bread brought to the table and not to eat. This bread was used to wipe their hands in their mouth in the same way that we might use a napkin or some sort of cloth, right? A cloth napkin or paper napkin. They would use bread. And when they used the bread, they would then throw it under the table. right? Now, when we read this right now, we think, oh, wow, the scraps have fallen to the table. That's just a little bit. No, there was sometimes, if there were lots of people, there was an enormous amount of food just under the table. And after it was done, the dogs that person had, hunting dogs, those kind of things, not wild street dogs, the dogs of this person would come in and would eat what was under the table. And when Lazarus here, it says he longs to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Yeah, this is the food for the dogs. And what we see is that there's this just conspicuous wealth, this unjust level of wealth that's going on there, and gluttony and greed, that there are mounds of bread available just inside. But Lazarus was not able to access it. Instead, the dogs would eat the bread, and then, in the act of just deep humiliation, these dogs, who were eating way better than Lazarus, who were eating just what Lazarus would love to eat, anything, those dogs would then come out and lick Lazarus' sores. It's an extra level of humiliation. And what we have here is this sort of setting of the scene with the rich man and Lazarus, to go ahead and put, maybe this guy is rich. Maybe you might think by default that he's a good person, but this is not okay. What's happening here is not okay. The other thing that's interesting is that Lazarus is named, but the rich man never receives a name. That's interesting because it treats Lazarus, the story itself, the way Jesus is telling it, the way the writer of the book of Luke is telling this story, is to highlight the humanity of Lazarus and take some of that away from the rich man in a sort of upending, because what's happening in this story is Lazarus is not being treated as a human, is not being treated with dignity by the rich man. And we see this upending of that, and this humanizing and valuing of Lazarus, just even in the way the story is being told. I think that's really interesting for us, right? The way sometimes a way that you can discover something about yourself, discover hidden biases, is to think about how you tell stories, right? When you see something difficult, unsettling, something that is that gives you this sense of injustice, how are you telling that story? Who is the person in the story that is being given the most value? Who is it that is being seen as the most human? Because sometimes you'll find that there's this implicit bias that is sometimes hard to put your finger on until you notice that when you're telling a story of seeing somebody who is poor, all the things that you're saying about them are negative, instead of reframing it in a positive light. Like, say I saw this guy came up to me on the street and asked me for money, and he was disgusting. He was filthy. He smelled bad. Whatever. Instead of saying, like, this guy came up to me on the street he was clearly homeless. And even though I'm sure he knew he smelled bad, he knew he didn't have a bath, he still came up and asked me for money. He had the courage to do that. Or maybe you say his situation, wow, it's so desperate that he would, in that state, come up to people. See the difference there. The difference of how you told that story can reveal something to you about how you are seeing the world and how you are treating people. Because that implicit bias can shape our actions and our decisions in a way that that is unfortunate, right? And finding those places in ourselves, looking at the way we're telling the story. Who is it that gets a name in the story? Yeah. So Lazarus, the named one, the poor one, the person with skin disease gets a name. The rich man does not. And then in verse 22, we see it says, the poor man died and was carried away. And this is lots of visual here, right? The poor man died and was carried away. There's no funeral. There's no honoring of him. He was dishonored in death just as he was dishonored in life. Nobody cared about him in death or in life. He's just carried away. But he's carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. So you get this, like, he dies, he was carried away, and there is this sort of negative feeling all the way up until the sentence turns, and it says by the angels to be with Abraham. Yeah. So we see that he may not be honored in this life, but he is being honored in the next. In the end of that verse, it says, the rich man also died and was buried. Very curt, and again, putting way less emphasis on the rich man than on Lazarus, but he was buried. Buried means a funeral. He had the whole thing. People honored him in death as they honored him in life, right? And then it says, verse 23, the first two words, in Hades. This is important because if you've watched any of my videos or listened to any of the podcasts that we've talked about the verses that people say refer to hell, this is one of those verses. But Hades is not anywhere close to our modern idea of hell, right? Our modern idea of hell is shaped mostly by a book of fiction called Dante's Inferno. This idea that the evil are going to go and burn for forever in a place of punishment, that is a difficult thing to find in the Bible. And this definitely isn't it, because it uses a term that you probably know, and everyone in that part of the world knew. It's the term Hades. If you remember from your high school English class or history class when you were studying Greek and Roman mythology, you remember that Hades is the land of the dead. It is the land of all the dead, much like the afterlife that's talked about in the Old Testament called Sheol. It's also around for all of the dead. But Hades, we know the old deal. You go down and you pay the guy the toll to cross the river Styx, and then you get into this afterlife. And the afterlife, if you were good in this life, you have a good afterlife. You go to a really great place. If you were bad, if you were evil in this life, then you were punished, at least for a while, in Hades. And there's some sort of punishment that matches the injustice that you propagated in your life. And so for the rich man who didn't give food or water, use his resources for other people, all of his resources are gone. He has no water and he's thirsty. He's experiencing in his punishment in the afterlife what Lazarus experienced every day. Again, this is another piece of this reversal. That's the thing that the writer of the book of Luke does over and over again. He's sort of reversing things. This is a surprising story. So he's in the afterlife and he's being punished. And the point of punishment in the afterlife in Hades is that you figure out what's wrong, you get better, right? And that's not what's going on here, right? At least not yet. We see that the rich man has not figured it out because he looks up and he sees Abraham and Lazarus there. They're in a good part of Hades. And his punishment is such that he has to see the good part, just like Lazarus, right? So Lazarus had to see the opulence. He had to see all of these people having a great life, enjoying themselves, all of that kind of stuff. Even though he wasn't part of it, couldn't access it, and they ignored him. So the rich man is experiencing the same thing. He sees Lazarus and Abraham. And the way he acts in the afterlife is very similar to the way he would have acted in this life. Because he still is not valuing Lazarus. He still is not treating Lazarus as a human being, as a person who is worthy of dignity. Even when he sees that he is in torment and Lazarus is the one who is getting the reward and who is with Abraham, that still doesn't break through to him in the afterlife. No. He ignores Lazarus and he called out, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me." He addresses Abraham. And the way the rich man is hoping that Abraham would have mercy on him is to, get this, send Lazarus. The phrasing there, what's coming to mind is that Lazarus is the servant of Abraham. He's a slave, right? The rich man still can't imagine that there was any reason that Lazarus should deserve to be where he is. Even in the afterlife, even as he's tormented, he assumes that Lazarus is Abraham's servant. He says, "Abraham, send your boy to give me some water." And Abraham says, "Child, remember that during your lifetime you received good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony." This, I think, really should make us all pause. Because this story, it's not about the afterlife. This story is about this life. And to spend too much time talking about how this story is or isn't about hell and the afterlife is to miss the point of the story, which is almost always the case when there's a passage that people want to say is about heaven or hell, that like the argument about it being about heaven or hell is just a complete distraction from the real message of it. And the real message of this, we're getting a sense of right here. Lazarus received evil, and he received evil from multiple people, including this rich man. Throughout the New Testament, especially in the teachings of Jesus, wealth is sort of a warning sign that you might be evil. And I live in the United States of America, and in the United States of America, I am not a wealthy person. And so when I read passages like this, I often will identify more with Lazarus. I am not in abject poverty, but I'm no Joel Osteen with a private jet. And so our tendency in reading stories like this is to, let ourselves off the hook in a way, to read them in the best possible light for ourselves. And so to say, oh, I'm Lazarus, oh, I'm going to get rewarded. But though I'm not the wealthiest, there are definitely people, many people, who are much more poor than I am. And if you take this on a global scale, almost every American is wealthier than most of the world's population. When you put it that way, then you say, oh, wait, hang on. I'm the wealthy person? Huh. I'm the rich man in the rich man and Lazarus story? I mean, think about how much food isn't just thrown on your table and given to the dogs, but just it's thrown away. How much money and resources and actual food do we spend on feeding our pets when there are people dying every minute of every day from hunger and hunger-related illnesses? Yeah. All of a sudden, the question of the guilt and who is wealthy and who is not starts to turn on me. And I have to ask myself, okay, what is the throwing the bread under the table that I do? Right? Like, what is it that I am engaging in as a human that is either taking resources away from the poor or wasting resources that could be used to help people who have less than I do? Yeah. We want to automatically make ourselves Lazarus in the story, but maybe the more helpful thing for you is to go back through the story and read it as if you're the rich man. So then the rich man shifts his tone and he says, okay, wait. Send him again. Abraham has tried to break through, right? He said, you received good things. Lazarus received evil things. But now he is comforted here and you are in agony. And that doesn't click with the rich man. He's still treating Lazarus as the servant, not Lazarus as somebody who is worthy of being in paradise with Abraham in the afterlife. He says again, then I beg you to send him to my father's house. For I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them so that they will not also come into this place of torment. Like Lazarus, the poor man, the servant of Abraham, go send your boy to my brothers to stop those rich guys from getting here. Yeah. Again, his concern is not for the poor people. It's still not for the people who are like Lazarus in this life, right? It's not could you send Lazarus to try to convince more people to give food to the people sitting outside? No. Go save my brothers. Save my brothers from this fate that I have endured. And as you get to this point, Abraham's response is really, in some way, just stating the obvious. Because the rich man has just exemplified how wealth has completely changed his perspective to the point that he can't even see the problem, right? And even in the afterlife, even when he's being tormented, he still can't see the problem. He's talking to Abraham, Lazarus, the poor man who was sitting outside of the fence, the gate of his house. Lazarus is with Abraham, and he's literally talking. He's still hasn't figured it out. So when Abraham says, look, even if Lazarus does go back, somebody coming back from the dead, like, your brothers are in the same state as you. Your brothers still won't believe. They've got all they need. All they need, he says, is Moses and the prophets. All they need is the law. That the law tells them to take care of people like Lazarus, right? Story of God over and over again is God being on the side of the poor and the oppressed. Yeah, he just can't. He can't get it. He can't figure it out. And like, this rich man has the law and the prophets, but also has literally Abraham in the afterlife talking to him, and he can't get it. Yeah, his brothers won't either. His brothers are not going to catch this. And so we're faced with this dilemma here in this parable of Jesus, that he is, Jesus is being really clear. He's saying, like, wealth is deceptive. Wealth doesn't just make you think higher of yourself. It shifts your perception of the world. To think that just because you were born in a wealthy country means that you or your country is inherently better than other countries. That those countries are poor because they don't work hard or are lazy or are whatever it is. Their brains are not as good as yours. They're whatever. Wealth makes you think that you are in a higher position than you are. And though you might not be the wealthiest in your culture, you may be one of the wealthier people in the world. And one of the things that if you talk to wealthy people, very few wealthy people will see themselves as wealthy because they always can find somebody who has more money. But just because someone has more money than you doesn't mean you're not wealthy. Doesn't mean that the money and resources that you have haven't shaped you in such a way that you are confused. You are not able to see the poverty. Yeah. So what I'm saying is, go back, Luke chapter 16, 19 through 31. Read it again. Read it as the rich man. And then see what you find inside yourself. There's this practice that people will talk about when they talk about ancient spiritual texts like the Bible. Because spiritual texts are meant to help you connect with God, become the best version of yourself, right? That's their main goal. And a lot of times what you need is not to read the spiritual text, but to allow the text to read you. That's where the power is. To put yourself in the words, to allow the words to come at you and show you where the holes are, where the wounds are, where the evil is, where the injustice is in your own life, and then help guide you to a new place. So yeah, this is one of those moments. It's one of those passages. Go back. Luke chapter 16, 19 through 31, and let it read you. We call this a book club because a book club isn't a book club without the club. And we have this spiritual community that we call Not Church. And it's a place where we talk about these podcast episodes. We talk about life and faith, but it's completely accepting. There are people in there of all kinds of spiritual identifications and non-spiritual identifications, right? So we've got atheists and agnostics. It's called Not Church. And it's a place where you can go and have a supportive community, where you can process your own religious hurt. You can talk about spirituality and beliefs in such a way that you can learn from each other. And we've got channels for all of that. We've got memes and politics and people who are queer, who are talking about what that means as a spiritual person. And yeah, it's great. It's really, I think you would love it. It's called Not Church. And the way that you can become part of Not Church is you go to patreon.com/skepticpastor. Patreon.com/skepticpastor. It's $3 a month. It's $3 a month because this religious community is never going to tell you that you need to donate 10% of your income. That's also not in the Bible. But it's $3. And if it works for you, great. If it doesn't work, just stop paying. Yeah. And if you're listening to this podcast, wherever you listen to it, if you could give us all the stars, leave a comment, or even share it with a friend, it'd be great. Just tell them to look up Unbelief Podcast wherever they do the podcast thing. That's it. That's the podcast. Shout out to the Choir Network, to Patheos, to Matthew and Keith, who make everything happen. Now, get out of here. Go do something to make the world a better place. Okay? We'll see you next time.